Hey everyone! Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the truths behind history. For decades, Elton John was seen by the public as a loyal friend who always stayed within unspoken boundaries, never saying too much and never questioning the narratives surrounding Princess Diana. Fans assumed that his friendship with the princess was simple, joyful, and filled with shared laughter. But over time, Elton's words have shifted. They carry weight, reflecting a deeper, more painful understanding of loss and the heavy burden of knowing secrets few could comprehend. What he has shared recently is not just nostalgia or a tribute. It's an expression of unresolved grief, anger, and a quiet frustration with the constraints that surrounded Diana. Their friendship was unusual, intimate, and far more human than most people imagined. Elton did not enter Diana's life as a distant celebrity or a formal guest of the palace. Their connection began in moments that were unguarded, sincere, and profoundly personal. It was a friendship born of honesty and shared understanding rather than privilege or ceremony. Elton first met Diana in the early 1980s at a private event at Windsor Castle. Unlike others who approached her with protocol and admiration, Elton came without expectation, without press, and without any rigid plan for the evening. He noticed immediately that Diana responded to authenticity, not status. They danced together, laughed together, and shared a freedom few outsiders ever experienced. That evening planted the seeds for a friendship that would grow over the years, shaped by private conversations and mutual understanding. What made their connection extraordinary was that both had experienced the isolating effects of fame. They knew what it meant to be adored publicly, yet profoundly lonely behind closed doors. In each other, they found someone who understood the pressure of living a life constantly under scrutiny, where personal truths were often hidden in plain sight. As their friendship deepened, Elton discovered sides of Diana that the public rarely saw. She was more than the smiling figure captured by photographers. She was witty, observant, and acutely aware of the mechanics of power that existed behind the palace walls. Diana listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, she addressed topics that most people avoided, showing an intelligence and courage that left a lasting impression. Together, they engaged in charity work and private conversations that strengthened their bond, forming a connection based not on fame or obligation, but on shared sensitivity and understanding. Yet, even this closeness did not escape notice. Within the royal circle, outsiders who earned Diana's trust were tolerated with caution. Elton was admired, celebrated, but always watched. As Diana's marriage fell apart and she sought greater independence, the people around her became increasingly protective, suspicious, and cautious about who had access to her heart and mind. Elton noticed subtle signals that the world around Diana was becoming constricting. Their friendship, once effortless, began to carry a weight of scrutiny. The palace's invisible pressures were not always overt. They came in silence, distance, and unspoken expectations. Elton later reflected on how these pressures created a fragile environment for Diana, one where vulnerability was not supported, but rather constrained by institutional expectation. As he became closer to her, Elton realized that the more he cared for her, the more delicate her world became. The very system meant to protect her was incapable of embracing openness or emotional honesty. Elton believed friendship could shield her, but he could not have foreseen the consequences that would later haunt him. He watched as Diana's independence, her bravery, and her authenticity were subtly discouraged, replaced with formal distance and cautionary politeness. By the early 1990s, Elton began sensing a shift. Their conversations, once casual and warm, were increasingly weighed with care. Diana became measured in her words, careful not to reveal anything that could provoke backlash from advisors or the palace itself. Elton recognized these as signs of survival, not paranoia. Diana's humanitarian work, particularly her efforts in AIDS awareness, had already challenged long-standing fears and discomfort in certain circles. Every courageous gesture she made publicly carried private consequences. Elton admired her because he recognized a reflection of his own battles with stigma. Together, they shared the belief that visibility and empathy could dismantle fear, but the cost of these actions became increasingly apparent. Invitations changed, old friends vanished, and her circle narrowed to those who reinforced caution rather than honesty. Elton felt a quiet concern for Diana that he could neither openly express nor fully resolve. Elton's discomfort deepened as he realized the subtle but firm constraints around Diana. Their once effortless friendship entered what he later described as a confusing freeze. The shift was not caused by argument or betrayal. It was procedural, subtle, and often misunderstood. A specific project with Gianni Versace highlighted this tension. They collaborated on a high-profile book meant to raise funds for AIDS causes, but Diana withdrew unexpectedly from public support, declining to attend events or write a foreword. To Elton, this felt like a rejection, even though the reality was far more complex. Diana's withdrawal was driven by fear, concern over protocol, and the pressures of representing the monarchy. Elton understood, yet the absence felt heavier than any explanation. The formal tone she adopted, when responding to him, only deepened the emotional distance. The rift, though unspoken, lingered for months. Elton continued the charitable project, ensuring its success, but the joy of collaboration was gone. When Gianni Versace was tragically murdered, Diana reached out to Elton directly. The gesture reminded him of the power of grief to bridge even the widest distance. Their conversations after Versace's death were raw and honest, reconnecting them in a way that neither could have anticipated. Yet the timing was cruel. Their bond, reopened in mourning, was still fragile, limited by circumstances and the inevitability of loss. The summer that followed was emotionally disorienting, surreal, and unrelenting. Their shared grief created moments of connection, overshadowed by the awareness of how little time they truly had. At Versace's funeral, Elton's public composure faltered. Overwhelmed by sorrow, he broke down in front of cameras, while Diana remained a pillar of calm, offering comfort and silent strength. Elton reflected on this moment for years, recognizing the quiet exchange of support that happened between them, a mutual reliance born of shared scrutiny and public expectation. Within weeks, Diana's life was tragically cut short. The suddenness of her death left Elton grappling not just with grief, but with disbelief, guilt, and unresolved questions. He wondered if the silence that had defined so much of their relationship had inadvertently contributed to an environment in which dangers went unspoken. The world demanded mourning, but Elton's grief was intensely personal, nuanced, and complicated by the weight of unfinished conversations. When asked to perform at Diana's funeral, Elton hesitated. The moment was too raw, the pressure immense, and he feared breaking down in front of millions. Yet he ultimately decided to honor her memory through music. He rewrote a song initially dedicated to Marilyn Monroe, infusing every word with reflection on Diana's compassion, courage, and contradictions. The tribute faced behind-the-scenes scrutiny. Some felt it was too sentimental or modern for such a ceremony. Yet Elton persisted, understanding that this performance was not about approval, but about expressing something deeply personal and irreplaceable. On that day, he balanced grief, memory, and public expectation with meticulous care, honoring Diana through art and emotion. The song became an anthem of collective mourning, but its success brought mixed feelings. Elton was unsettled by the public's consumption of grief, questioning whether repeating her memory in that way was respectful. He decided the performance would remain unique to that moment, never to be replicated. In retreating from public events afterward, Elton recognized the difference between performing and truly mourning. Fame had once been empowering, but now it felt like noise, an intrusion into an already painful process of loss. Diana's absence left questions unanswered, conversations incomplete, and memories tinged with sorrow and regret. Over the years, Elton's reflection on Diana deepened. He rarely spoke publicly about her in ways that captured the full weight of their friendship. Behind closed doors, however, his grief evolved into a more complex contemplation of vulnerability, fear, and systemic failure. Watching Prince Harry grow and react to his performance at the funeral further reinforced Elton's awareness of Diana's continuing impact. He realized that her death was not a closed chapter, but a wound that quietly shaped the lives of those left behind. This reflection brought renewed acknowledgement of the pressures Diana faced, the surveillance, and the restrictions that limited her freedom and safety. In interviews later in life, Elton described silence not as a choice, but as something learned, a form of protection in an environment that demanded discretion and caution. His words carried a deliberate weight, emphasizing that Diana had navigated forces far beyond her control. Elton avoided accusations, instead framing the story in terms of vulnerability, isolation, and institutional pressure. He highlighted how easily responsibility dissolved into procedure and how often loyalty required restraint. Through these reflections, he underscored a painful truth. Diana's story was incomplete, not due to missing facts, but because the forces surrounding her often prevented openness, honesty, and care. Elton's silence, once a measure of respect, eventually became a source of personal reckoning. He confronted the reality that the constraints placed on Diana were neither accidental nor benign. As time went on, he recognized that his own reticence had, in small ways, reinforced the culture of restraint surrounding her. Fame, public attention, and ceremonial expectation often obscured the human cost of her bravery. By speaking openly later, Elton emphasized the importance of truth and emotional honesty over protocol and image. His reflections carried both sorrow and accountability, acknowledging the complexity of navigating personal bonds under extreme public scrutiny. The lessons Elton shared extend beyond grief. They explore friendship, loyalty, and the ethical dilemmas faced when caring for someone under constant pressure. His experience illustrates how public adoration can mask private vulnerability, and how institutional constraints can silence even the most compassionate relationships. Elton's accounts remind us that empathy, courage, and connection exist even when circumstances prevent full expression. His words show a journey from admiration and joy to concern, reflection, and, ultimately, the pursuit of truth. The friendship with Diana is remembered not just for the public moments, but for the intimacy, challenges, and quiet resilience shared between two extraordinary people. Even decades later, Elton's reflections highlight the ongoing tension between memory and responsibility. He emphasizes that grief is not linear, and that unresolved experiences linger. Watching Diana's legacy through the eyes of her children, the public, and his own recollections, Elton grapples with what it means to honor her truth fully. His storytelling reframes Diana not as a distant figure of tragedy, but as a profoundly human person navigating impossible pressures. Through his words, viewers gain a glimpse of the emotional and ethical weight carried by those closest to her, illuminating truths often hidden behind headlines, speculation, and silence. So, what do you think? Did Elton John stay silent too long, or was silence truly the only way he could protect Diana? Was the system meant to safeguard her actually failing her? Or is there more that remains untold? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe to the channel for more revelations from history, and stay tuned for the next video uncovering moments the world never fully understood. This version is humanized, flowing, and YouTube-friendly, while keeping the emotional intensity and depth.